On a sunny Sunday in the Charleston, South Carolina suburbs, Avery Blair, 27, should have walked into her childhood home carrying flowers and hearing laughter. Instead, Mother's Day arrived with unexpected coldness. Avery enters, bouquet in hand, hopeful, but her mother, Linda, greets her with icy detachment. "You're no longer welcome here. I think it's best you stay away." No explanation, no apology. Avery turns and drives away, heart burning. 2 days later, her phone rings. It's a lawyer from the family's firm. The words he delivers change everything. Because this isn't just a story about rejection. It's about the power to break cycles and the moment when a daughter cast aside decides to rewrite her place in the family narrative. Watch Avery uncover the secrets behind her mother's betrayal and subscribe for stories of courage, confrontation, and transformation. Chapter 1: The Rejection. Charleston shimmered under the May sunshine, its historic streets lined with blooming magnolias and jasmine that perfumed the warm southern air. Avery Blair tapped her fingers nervously on the steering wheel of her sedan parked outside the imposing colonial-style home where she'd grown up. The Georgian columns and wraparound porch remained as pristine as ever, just like the manicured lawn and the carefully tended flower beds. Her mother's pride and joy. Through the windshield, Avery could see the brass numbers above the door. 1842. The year the house was built, predating the Civil War. The Blairs had owned it for 3 generations. Her grandmother Caroline had often told her, "This house has seen more secrets than a confessional." Avery glanced at the passenger seat, where a bouquet of pink peonies and white roses lay wrapped in cream tissue paper. Her mother's favorites. She'd driven 40 minutes from her downtown apartment to the suburbs for this Mother's Day tradition, despite the growing distance between them over the past year. At 27, Avery was the family's disappointment, choosing a career in environmental law over joining the family's real estate empire, living in a modest apartment instead of accepting her parents' offer to buy her a house in the right neighborhood, dating who she wanted instead of the suitable candidates her mother subtly pushed her way at charity galas. "Just get it over with," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and checking her appearance in the rearview mirror. Her green eyes, her grandmother's eyes, stared back with apprehension. The walk to the front door felt longer than usual. Each step on the herringbone brick path brought back flashes of childhood. Running barefoot across the lawn, her father teaching her to ride a bike down this very path. Afternoon teas with her grandmother on the porch swing that still hung at the far end. Avery rang the doorbell, hearing the familiar chime echo through the house. She clutched the bouquet tighter, practiced her smile, and waited. When the heavy oak door swung open, her mother stood framed in the doorway, elegant as always in a pale blue dress, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. Linda Blair had maintained her beauty into her 50s through rigorous dedication, Pilates 3 times a week, bi-weekly facials, and a carefully curated diet. Avery. Not Mom, not Honey, just Avery. No smile either. "Happy Mother's Day," Avery said, extending the bouquet. "I thought maybe we could have lunch. I made a reservation at Magnolia's at 1. I know how much you loved their shrimp and grits." Linda didn't reach for the flowers. Her perfectly manicured hand remained on the doorknob, her sapphire ring, a family heirloom, catching the sunlight. "That won't be necessary." Her voice was cool, controlled. "I've already made plans with the Harringtons." Avery's smile faltered. Oh, well, maybe we could have coffee before, or I could join you? I haven't seen the Harringtons in ages. Avery. Linda's tone sharpened. I think we both know that things have changed. Something in her mother's eyes made Avery's stomach tighten. There was distance there, yes, that had been growing for months, but something else too, something colder, harder. What do you mean? Avery asked, the bouquet now hanging limply at her side. Linda straightened, her chin lifting slightly, the same posture she adopted when firing household staff or dealing with difficult clients. You're no longer welcome here. I think it's best you stay away. The words hit Avery like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step back, her heel catching on the edge of the brick path. Mom, what are you talking about? If this is about that argument we had at the foundation dinner? This isn't about one argument, Avery. This is about choices, about loyalty, about family. Linda's knuckles whitened on the doorknob. Something you've repeatedly demonstrated that you have little regard for. That's not fair. Your father and I have discussed this at length, Linda continued as if Avery hadn't spoken. We've decided it's better this way. Cleaner. Cleaner? Avery's voice cracked. I'm your daughter, not a stain you're trying to remove. For a moment, something flickered in Linda's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or pain. But it was gone so quickly, Avery wondered if she'd imagined it. Goodbye, Avery. Linda began closing the door. Wait, can I at least talk to Dad? Avery stepped forward, but the door was already shutting. He agrees with me, came her mother's voice through the narrowing gap. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The door closed with a definitive click. Avery stood frozen on the porch, the bouquet trembling in her hands, her ears ringing with disbelief. Behind her, a mockingbird trilled in the magnolia tree, and somewhere down the street, children laughed. The perfect Sunday in Charleston continued around her, oblivious to her world collapsing. She didn't remember walking back to her car, didn't remember dropping the flowers onto the passenger seat, didn't remember driving out of the neighborhood where she'd grown up, past the familiar landmarks of her childhood, the park where she'd had birthday parties, the corner store where she'd bought penny candy, the oak-lined streets where she'd learned to drive. Somehow, she found herself parked along the Battery, Charleston's iconic seawall promenade. The harbor stretched before her, sailboats dotting the blue water, the Fort Sumter National Monument visible in the distance. She'd come here countless times as a child with her grandmother, feeding the seagulls and watching the ships. Carolyn Blair had been different from the rest of the family, softer, kinder, with an artist's soul and a quiet wisdom that Avery had always cherished. When she passed away 6 months ago, Avery had lost her greatest ally in the family. Now, staring at the water, Avery let the tears come, hot and fast, blurring the horizon where the sea met the sky. Why, Mom? She whispered, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The harbor offered no answers, only the gentle lapping of waves against the seawall and the distant cry of gulls. As the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of gold and amber, Avery wiped her tears and started her car. She had no answers, only a hollow ache in her chest where her sense of belonging had once been. She didn't know that in 2 days everything would change again, that a phone call would unravel secrets her family had kept buried for decades, and that her grandmother, even in death, would give her one final gift: the truth. If this story of family secrets and emotional journeys resonates with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Each week we delve into complex human stories that mirror the struggles and triumphs we all face in our own lives. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers and never miss the next chapter in Avery's journey as she discovers the shocking truth behind her mother's rejection. Chapter 2: The Truth in the Pages. The law offices of Pendleton and Associates occupied the third floor of a renovated cotton warehouse in Charleston's historic district. Exposed brick walls and restored heart pine floors gave the space a warmth that most legal offices lacked, though Avery barely noticed as she was led down the corridor by a young paralegal. "Mr. Pendleton is expecting you," the woman said, gesturing to a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. 2 days had passed since her mother's rejection, 2 days of unanswered calls to both parents, 2 days of vacillating between anger and grief, between demanding explanations and wanting to disappear. When James Pendleton, her grandmother's longtime attorney, had called requesting an urgent meeting, Avery had almost declined. What was the point of dealing with more family matters when she'd been so clearly excised from the family? But something in the lawyer's voice had convinced her to come. "Your grandmother was very specific about the timing," he said, "and Miss Blair, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Now, as she stepped into Pendleton's office, Avery felt a flutter of anxiety. The attorney rose from behind his desk, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been handling the Blair family's legal affairs since before she was born. "Avery, thank you for coming." He extended his hand, his handshake firm and reassuring. "Please, have a seat." She sank into the leather chair opposite his desk, noting the framed photographs of his family on the credenza behind him: children's graduations, a wedding, grandchildren on a beach. Normal family milestones, the kind that made her chest ache with fresh loss. "I assume this is about grandmother's will," Avery said, smoothing her skirt, a nervous habit. "Though I'm surprised there's anything left to discuss. The reading was months ago." Pendleton settled back into his chair, steepling his fingers. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, prudent, forward-thinking, and," he added with a small smile, "occasionally quite secretive." He opened a drawer and removed a leather-bound box, placing it carefully on the desk between them. It was small, perhaps 8 by 10 inches, with a brass clasp that had tarnished with age. "Caroline left this in my keeping with explicit instructions. It was to be given to you and only you 2 days after this year's Mother's Day." He pushed the box toward her. "She was very specific about the timing." Avery stared at the box, her heartbeat quickening. "She knew," she whispered. "Somehow she knew something would happen." "Your grandmother was very perceptive," Pendleton said diplomatically. "I don't know what's in the box, Avery. I was simply instructed to keep it safe and deliver it at the appointed time." With trembling fingers, Avery released the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside lay a small, leather-bound journal with a faded green cover, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it was an envelope with her name written in her grandmother's elegant script, and a small brass key. "I'll give you some privacy," Pendleton said, rising. "Take all the time you need. Would you like some coffee or water?" "Water, please," Avery said, her mouth suddenly dry. When the door closed behind him, Avery lifted the envelope first. Her name, just Avery, was written in the same blue ink her grandmother had always favored. Breaking the seal, she withdrew a single sheet of heavy stationery and recognized Caroline's distinctive handwriting immediately. "My dearest Avery, if you're reading this, then the moment I've long feared has finally arrived. Your mother has chosen the family legacy over her daughter, just as her mother once chose it over me. History repeats itself in the Blair family, a sad pattern I had hoped would end with your generation. But some secrets have roots too deep to be easily pulled. The journal belonged to my mother, your great-grandmother Elizabeth. What you'll find in these pages may shock you, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about our family's fortune and the price that's been paid to maintain it." The key opens a safe deposit box at Coastal Trust Bank, box number 437. Inside is evidence that will corroborate everything in the journal, should you need it. Remember this, my darling girl. You are a Blair, but you don't have to be defined by the Blair legacy. You've always had the strength to forge your own path. Now you'll need that strength more than ever. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. Some cowardice, perhaps, but also protection. Knowledge is power, but it's also a burden. I hope you can forgive me for waiting until now. All my love, Grandmother. P.S. When you finish reading, you'll understand why the orchid greenhouse was always my sanctuary. Some beauty can grow even from the darkest soil. Avery read the letter twice more, her grandmother's voice so clear in her mind, she could almost hear her speaking the words. She set it aside carefully and picked up the journal, its leather cover soft from decades of handling. Opening to the first page, she found an inscription, Elizabeth Ann Blair, 1943. The journal began with ordinary entries, details of Elizabeth's life as a young woman in Charleston during World War II. Her husband, Robert Blair, was serving in Europe while she maintained their affairs at home. As Avery turned the pages, she became engrossed in her great-grandmother's world. The rationing, the war news, the social obligations that continued despite global conflict. Then, halfway through the journal, the tone changed dramatically. April 17, 1944. R's partner H was found dead yesterday. The official story is heart failure, but I know better. The timing is too convenient, coming just days after their disagreement about the German contracts. I confronted R when he called from New York, but he dismissed my concerns. "Business is business, Lizzie," he said. "Sometimes hard decisions must be made." I fear what my husband has become in his quest for wealth. Avery's breath caught. Was her great-grandmother implying that her husband, Avery's great-grandfather, had been involved in someone's death? She read on, her hands growing clammy. May 3rd, 1944. R returned home today with a briefcase full of cash and documents, transferring H's shares in the company to him. He now has controlling interest. When I asked where the money came from during wartime, he told me never to question him again if I wanted to maintain our position in society. I hardly recognized the man I married. Later, he revealed we're now supplying materials to both sides of the Atlantic. American steel for our boys, but through shell companies, the same steel reaches German hands at triple the price. It's treason, it's blood money, but R says it's just business, and that neutrality in commerce is the American way. Avery felt physically ill. The Blair fortune, the wealth that had built their family home, funded their privileged lives, established their standing in Charleston society, had origins in war profiteering, possibly even murder. As she continued reading, the evidence mounted. Elizabeth detailed wire transfers through Swiss banks, meetings with mysterious European businessmen, and her husband's increasingly lavish lifestyle built on what she called the death trade. She also chronicled her own moral collapse, how she chose silence and comfort over speaking out, how she became complicit to maintain her position. The final entries were the most disturbing. December 12, 1945. The war is over, but R's business continues to thrive. He's laundered the German money through legitimate investments, real estate mainly. Charleston properties purchased for pennies from desperate families, now worth fortunes. He speaks of a Blair dynasty that will last generations. I've made my decision. I cannot leave. He's made it clear what would happen if I tried. But I've hidden copies of his records where he'll never find them. Perhaps someday, someone braver than I will use them to make things right. I will play my part, the dutiful wife, the Charleston socialite. But I've started a tradition that I'll pass to my daughter. Each Blair woman will know the truth when the time is right. We'll carry this burden together until someone finds the courage to end it." The journal ended there. Avery closed it gently, her mind reeling. This was why her mother had cut her off. She must have known Avery would receive the journal, would learn the truth. Her environmental law practice, her public challenges to developers with questionable ethics, her refusal to join the family business, all of it threatened the carefully constructed facade of Blair respectability. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Pendleton entered with a glass of water, which Avery accepted gratefully. "Did you know," she asked after taking a long drink, "about the contents?" The attorney sat down, his expression grave. "I knew there were irregularities in how the first Robert Blair built his fortune, but the specifics? No." He hesitated. "Your grandmother consulted me about certain legal matters over the years, ways to separate legitimate family assets from those with questionable origins. She was trying to clean things up, in her way." "Does my mother know all this?" "Yes," Pendleton said simply. "Caroline told her when Linda turned 30. It's apparently a Blair family tradition. The women are told. The men are kept in the dark." Avery thought of her father, always focused on the next real estate development, proud of continuing the Blair legacy. Did he have any idea what that legacy truly was? "What do I do with this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Pendleton leaned forward. "That, Avery, is entirely up to you. But your grandmother believed you would make the right choice. She always said you had a moral compass that the rest of the family seemed to lack." Avery gathered the journal, letter, and key, placing them back in the box. She felt the weight of generations of secrets, of choices made and avoided, of complicity and fear passed down like an heirloom. "There's one more thing," Pendleton said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a thick manila envelope. "Your grandmother left you something else. A trust in your name only, separate from the family assets, enough for you to be comfortable for the rest of your life, should you choose to use it." "Blood money," Avery said quietly. "Clean money," Pendleton corrected. "Caroline spent the last 30 years of her life carefully extracting legitimate assets from the family fortune. This money comes from her personal investments, a shrewd portfolio she built herself. She was quite the businesswoman in her own right." Avery accepted the envelope, suddenly understanding the deeper significance of her grandmother's orchid greenhouse. The business she'd built selling rare specimens to collectors around the world. Not just a hobby, but her own source of independent wealth, free from the tainted Blair fortune. As she left the office, the leather box tucked under her arm, Avery felt both burdened and strangely liberated. The mystery of her mother's rejection had been solved, but in its place lay a heavier question. What would she do with the truth she now possessed? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Charleston's historic streets as she walked to her car. For generations, Blair women had carried this secret, choosing family loyalty over justice, comfort over truth. Now the choice was hers, and for the first time, she understood exactly why her mother had told her to stay away. And Avery Blair was no longer afraid. Chapter 3. Breaking the Cycle. The safe deposit box contained exactly what her grandmother had promised: evidence, photographs, financial documents, letters, a paper trail spanning 8 decades that confirmed everything in Elizabeth Blair's journal. Avery spent 3 days in her apartment, blinds drawn, piecing together the full story of her family's fortune. The original sin, war profiteering, and the suspicious death of Robert Blair's business partner was just the beginning. Each generation had added new layers to the deception: real estate acquired through insider trading in the 1950s, environmental regulations circumvented in the 1970s, bribes to city officials in the 1990s. The Blair Empire was built on a foundation of carefully concealed corruption, and the women had always known, always kept the secret. On the fourth morning, Avery woke before dawn and drove to the one place she felt closest to her grandmother, the orchid greenhouse on the eastern edge of the Blair property. It was technically trespassing now that she'd been banished, but she knew the gardener's schedule and the security code. At 5:30 a.m., she'd have the sanctuary to herself. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and light, filled with thousands of orchids in every imaginable color. Caroline Blair had built it 30 years ago, turning her passion for the exotic flowers into a respected business that supplied collectors worldwide. The air inside was heavy with humidity and the subtle fragrance of blossoms. Avery walked slowly down the central aisle, trailing her fingers over familiar pots and labels. Here was where she'd learned patience from her grandmother, watching as plants that seemed dormant for months suddenly burst into spectacular bloom. Here was where she'd been taught that beauty often required time and care to reveal itself. Here, too, was where she'd had her most honest conversations with Caroline, away from the watchful eyes of her parents. "I understand now," Avery said aloud, stopping beside a spectacular purple cattleya, her grandmother's favorite variety. "This was your clean money, your escape plan." She sank onto the wooden bench in the center of the greenhouse, surrounded by cascading blooms and the gentle hiss of the misting system. The morning light filtered through the glass panels, creating a kaleidoscope of shadows on the stone floor. From this vantage point, she could just see the main house through the trees, imposing, pristine, full of secrets. How many Blair women had looked at that house and chosen silence? How many had prioritized family reputation over truth? The sound of the greenhouse door opening startled her. Avery turned, expecting to see the gardener, but instead found herself face to face with her mother. Linda Blair stood framed in the doorway, her usual impeccable appearance somewhat diminished. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup, something Avery couldn't remember ever seeing before. She looked older, vulnerable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the greenhouse's automated misting system activating, filling the air with the fine spray that caught the morning light. "I thought I might find you here," Linda finally said, stepping inside and letting the door close behind her. "Mother always said you were the only one who truly appreciated this place the way she did." Avery remained seated, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. "Did you follow me?" "No." Linda moved further into the greenhouse, her fingers brushing against a nearby leaf. "The security system sent an alert when the code was entered. I was already awake." Another silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I have the journal, and everything else Grandmother left in the safe deposit box." Linda nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I thought this day would come eventually, though I had hoped." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Well, it doesn't matter what I hoped." "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Avery asked, the question that had been burning inside her for days. "Why push me away instead of explaining?" Linda moved to the bench, but didn't sit, maintaining the distance between them. "Because that's the pattern, isn't it? That's what we Blair women do." Her laugh was hollow. "My mother did it to me. Her mother did it to her. We protect the men from the truth and carry the burden ourselves." "That's not an answer." "No, I suppose it's not." Linda sighed, running her hand along the wooden back of the bench. "The truth, Avery, I was afraid of what you might do with the information." "Because I'm not like you?" Avery said quietly. "Because I wouldn't keep the secret?" "Because you're better than me," Linda corrected, her voice barely audible. I saw it in you from the time you were little. That moral certainty, that willingness to stand up even when it cost you something. Avery studied her mother's profile, seeing for the first time the strain that decades of secrecy had etched into her face. So you thought I'd what? Expose the family? Go to the authorities? Wouldn't you? Linda turned to face her, eyes searching. Isn't that what your environmental law practice is all about? Holding powerful entities accountable? The question hung in the air between them. Would she? Before finding the journal, Avery might have answered without hesitation. Now, understanding the complexity of family loyalty and generational secrets, she wasn't so sure. I don't know, she admitted, but I deserved the chance to make that choice for myself. You didn't have the right to shut me out to protect a legacy built on suffering. Linda flinched, as if struck. No, she said after a moment. I didn't. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded photograph, extending it toward Avery. Do you remember this? Avery took it, recognizing it immediately. The photo showed 3 generations of Blair women in this very greenhouse. Her grandmother, Caroline, her mother, Linda, and herself, at about 10 years old, all smiling among the orchids, happy, connected. That was the summer Mother taught you how to hand-pollinate the orchids, Linda said softly. You were so patient, so careful with those tiny brushes. She told me later that you had a gift she hadn't seen in anyone else in the family. Avery remembered that day, the trust she'd felt being allowed to perform the delicate task, the pride when her grandmother praised her steady hands. She loved you so much, Avery, more than she ever loved me, I think. There was no bitterness in Linda's voice, just a simple acknowledgement. Because she saw herself in you, not as she was, but as she wished she could have been, brave enough to break the cycle. Is that why you pushed me away? Jealousy? Avery asked, though she already knew the answer was more complicated. Linda shook her head. Fear. Your father was getting suspicious about certain irregularities in the family accounts. Your grandmother had been slowly transferring assets for years, cleaning them up, as she called it, creating that trust fund for you. When you started asking questions about the development deals at the last foundation dinner, I panicked. I thought if I severed ties, you'd be safe from whatever might happen if the truth came out. You were trying to protect me, Avery said, the realization dawning, in your own misguided way. I've never been good at showing love, Avery. My mother wasn't either, until you came along and somehow opened something in her. Linda's eyes filled with tears, another first in Avery's experience. I thought I was continuing the tradition, carrying the burden so you wouldn't have to, but all I did was hurt you, just as my mother hurt me when she finally told me the truth. The misting system activated again, filling the air around them with a gentle rain that beaded on the leaves and flowers. What happens now? Avery asked quietly. Linda straightened, composing herself. That depends on you. The evidence you have, it could destroy everything. The family name, the business. Your father would be devastated. He truly doesn't know. And you? What do you want me to do? For the first time, Linda seemed genuinely uncertain. I don't know anymore. For decades, I've lived by one rule: protect the Blair legacy at all costs. Now, she gestured helplessly, now I just want to stop losing the people I love. Avery let the weight of that admission settle between them. Her mother had never been so vulnerable, so honest with her before. I've been thinking about what Grandmother wrote, about how each generation of Blair woman carried this burden, waiting for someone brave enough to end it. I don't think she meant exposing everything publicly. I think she meant breaking the cycle of secrecy and fear. She stood and walked to a nearby orchid, one she recognized as a seedling she'd helped pollinate years ago, now mature and blooming magnificently. "The money in my trust fund, grandmother's clean money, I want to use it to make amends. Not publicly, not in a way that destroys the family, but meaningfully." She turned back to her mother. "We can't undo the past, but we can change the future." "How?" Linda asked, a hint of hope in her voice. "We start with what we can control. The Blair Foundation could focus exclusively on supporting veterans and Holocaust education programs. We can divest from any properties that were acquired unethically and turn them into affordable housing. We can fund environmental restoration in areas where Blair developments caused damage." Avery's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "We don't have to expose the original sin to address its consequences." Linda was silent for a long moment, considering. "Your father would resist changes to the business." "Then we start without him, with the foundation, with grandmother's money. And maybe, eventually, when he sees the good it does," Avery shrugged, "maybe he'll come around." "And us?" Linda asked, her voice vulnerable again. "Can we start over too?" Avery thought of all the years of emotional distance, the disapproval, the fundamental differences in how they viewed the world. It wouldn't be easy. But then she looked at the photographs still in her hand, 3 generations of women connected by blood, by secrets, and now, potentially, by healing. "I'd like to try," she said softly. "Not as keeper and kept, not as judge and judged, but as equals, as Blair women choosing a new legacy together." Linda stood, closing the distance between them with hesitant steps. "I don't know if I know how to do that," she admitted, "but I want to learn." The greenhouse door opened again, and this time it was the gardener, startled to find them there so early. "Mrs. Blair, Miss Avery, I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "It's all right, Martin," Linda said. "We were just leaving." She turned to Avery. Would you like to have breakfast? There's that cafe downtown you always liked." "Magnolia Morning. Yes, I'd like that." As they walked out of the greenhouse together, the morning sun now fully risen over Charleston, Avery felt the weight of generations beginning to lift. The path ahead wouldn't be simple or straight. There would be difficult conversations, resistance, maybe even failure. But for the first time in Blair family history, mother and daughter were walking toward the truth together, not away from it. The secrets that had poisoned their family for generations were finally in the open air, losing their power with every step. In her letter, Caroline had written that knowledge was both power and burden. She'd been right about that. But she'd been right about something else too. Avery had the strength to forge her own path. And maybe, just maybe, her mother did too. As Avery and Linda take their first tentative steps toward healing, we're reminded that family legacies, both beautiful and broken, shape us in ways we sometimes fail to recognize until we're forced to confront them. If this story of truth, reconciliation, and breaking generational patterns resonates with you, please subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the complexities of family relationships and the courage it takes to choose a different path. Your subscription supports our mission to tell stories that matter, stories that reflect the struggles we all face in our journey toward authenticity and connection. Thank you for joining us for Avery's story, and we look forward to sharing many more with you in the weeks to come.